I'm so excited to be on stage with some remarkable leaders and talking about that the collaboration word that Jay reference. How do we all collaborate more to get to where we collectively need to be? This is a critical conversation to us at RBC. I get to co-chair our enterprise climate strategy, and we're working with all sectors on more collaborative models, working with governments to ensure that they're helping ultimately our clients progress, because if our clients don't get there, we're not going to make the emissions targets that we've set, which include for the mobility sector that we're now on the hook for. So we're really, really, really interested to see how our clients are doing and what they need to accelerate. I'm going to start the conversation with Linda and Marissa to get a sense from a corporate leadership point of view of where you are. I often think, Linda, that this is a real-time case study that Harvard or forgive me, Ivy should be maybe doing a remarkable case study underway. And in that case study, curious what you and then Marissa are most excited about in your company, what's actually happening now, and then also the one thing that keeps you awake at night. I'm sure many things keep you awake at night, but one thing more than others. But Linda, first, what's going on at Linamar that is most exciting to you right now?
Yeah, I just think it's the most exciting time in history to be in the automotive industry with all this technology change and all this shift happening. It's fantastic. So to me, every vehicle is being redesigned, every vehicle is being rethought, not just in terms of its design, but in terms of its supply chain. So to me, as a supplier, there's every new vehicle, there's new opportunity that maybe didn't exist before. And with technology evolving as quickly as it is, and suppliers like ourselves, taking a real leadership position around that, we have lots of wonderful opportunities to get into a whole bunch of different platforms. So for us, we have really seen our electrified business wins accelerate. Last year was by far a record year in new business wins overall for Linamar. Over half the wins were for electrified vehicles, triple the level that we saw even just the year before. So we were really seeing momentum building in terms of the new opportunities in electrified vehicles. So we're really excited about where things are going.
Those are killer stats. What's the one thing that worries you most about keeping or even accelerating that momentum?
Yeah, I think that obviously as when you have any kind of transition like this, there's going to be bumps along the road. So how do we prepare for that? How do we make sure that we're ready to pivot where the market takes us? And to me, anytime there's uncertainty, you need to increase your levels of flexibility. So, when we think about our strategy, not just our strategy, but just in general, flexibility should be directly correlated to levels of uncertainty. So flexibility in your strategy, in your equipment, in the skill set of your people, in your access to capital, all of that needs to be as flexible as possible. So for instance, we have developed a strong portfolio of products for every type of vehicle propulsion, obviously internal combustion, but hybrid, fuel cell electric vehicle, battery electric vehicles, any type of propulsion. We have an equivalent level of content potential in those vehicles. So we're ready to pivot any way that the market goes. Similarly, we have we've always invested in primarily flexible CNC equipment, meaning we can easily retool those machines to other components. And that's really important in a world where it's not as clear where, what's going to happen when. You need to have that flexibility to take those assets that you've invested in and, economically shift them into different products. So, that's what we've got. Like, our equipment is primarily flexible, programmable equipment. We buy a new fixture that's a tenth of the cost of the overall equipment, and we're back in production on something else. And I think having that kind of strategy and mindset is really important when the landscape isn't exactly clear as to what's going to happen when.
What great insights. I love that word, flexibility, and maybe we can come back to it. How do you maintain flexibility, especially through a supply chain? It's hard enough within your own organization, but to have your suppliers and your customers also be flexible adds to that complexity. Marissa, what's most exciting right now at GM and GM Canada particularly?
Yeah, so I think we're absolutely leading on the EV future here in Canada specifically. Just in December, we opened Canada's first full-scale electric vehicle plant, and we're ramping that up quickly. So that is really exciting. 2023 is going to be a breakout year from a portfolio standpoint. At GM, we've been investing in our Ultium battery platform, which is a dedicated electric vehicle architecture that can span vehicles from the BrightDrop Zevo 600 that we're building at CAMI all the way to a very affordable, more compact Equinox EV and everything in between. You've got the Hummer Super Truck, the luxury Cadillac Lyriq. So you're going to see by the end of this year 9 of those Ultium-based vehicles available at our dealers' lot. So that's incredibly exciting for 2023 from a customer-facing standpoint. We've been investing, like I said, for a number of years, and now this is the year that we deliver in volume, and it's really, an inflection point in this transition to an all-electric future. So I'm most excited about that. The second, really close second, is the opportunity for Canada to play a role in our vertically integrated, complete ecosystem for the batteries. So I was visiting Bécancour, Quebec, the first week of January this year to see where we broke ground on our cathode active material processing plant. First of its kind in North America. And so that's incredibly exciting too, because it's a proof point that Canada does have the raw materials that we need. We're bringing the processing capability, and it's really part of the end-to-end supply chain, but we have an incredible amount of work to do in that area. We've secured what we need for battery raw minerals and battery capacity for up to 1 million vehicles to build in North America by 2025. We're focused now on 2025 to 2030, and we have very aggressive scaling plans for our electric vehicles, and that's going to require a lot of partnerships, some of which you've seen us announce, some of which we're working on every single day. So there is a lot to be excited about, but there's a lot that we know we have to get done.
And I'm sure many things worry you or concern you. What is there one thing that that concerns you most with all those opportunities before you that isn't certain?
I'll say with each of those 2 really exciting points, there's 2 concerns that I would put at the top of the list. One is mass consumer adoption. So we're bringing the portfolio. Our approach is an EV for everyone at all price points. Now, consumers, that video was very clever, but unfortunately factual as well. The geographic nature of Canada, the expanse of land, the lack of charging infrastructure, and we know that's front and center on customers' minds. They want to adopt the EV future. They want to be a part of, changing the world in this transformation, but nobody wants to change their lifestyle based on the capability of their electric vehicles. So we need to have a comprehensive charging infrastructure. We need to have robust energy grids across the country so that anyone, regardless of which province, which city, you have the confidence that when you purchase the EV, you're going to be able to charge it, you're going to be able to travel wherever you want to travel, and you're going to be able to use your vehicle however you want to use it. And so the charging infrastructure is one that keeps me up at night because we're not where we need to be. And it's not something that General Motors or any one of the vehicle manufacturers can do on their own. So I truly believe that the success of mass consumer adoption for electric vehicles is dependent on a variety of industries, and we really need to partner now to accelerate because we can't wait until 2027 or 2030. That's going to be too late.
Thank you for laying down the mega challenge. Rachel, I'm going to jump ahead to you. We have 50 minutes left. Just can you answer that challenge? No, we'll come back to Lana on all sorts of things, but genuinely, we were talking about this on the way in. That is the I don't know if it counts as an elephant in the room, but it's the mega challenge. Just quickly, what are the few things that you think we need to get going on to address that? to address that challenge?
Words nimble and flexible have been used a lot, and in our organization we think a lot about how public policy can really support some of this movement in the private sector. And nimble and flexible is not a word that the public sector is always known for. So I think that there is really a lot that can be done kind of through public policy, and that can happen both at the manufacturing level to really pull the ties, help identify where Canada is going to provide supports, help make sure that things like supporting infrastructure are there. That's charging networks on the kind of demand side, but also on the supply side, the clean electricity that's going to be required, shovel-ready industrial lands. So there's a really big role for the public sector, and I would say on the demand side, absolutely the charging infrastructure needs to be part of the plan. In other jurisdictions that have been very successful, though, that comes with kind of a suite of options. So incentives for purchase that help, attract new consumers. Different approaches to trying to make sure there's a predictability to demand. So, sales targets and other pieces. And those vary by jurisdiction, but I think there's a really we're watching a very exciting time where the private sector and the public sector need to be really working hand in hand, because so many of these decisions really, can't be done by one company, and need to have the support across the ecosystem. And that public sector involvement to help coordinate is just going to be very key.
I can stick to you on that, on that point. How can we make faster collective decisions, especially at a sectoral level? Because when I talk to government officials or sector leaders, they know what needs to be done, but they don't have a history or system set up to make collective decisions. Or as the video rightly showed, we also have a federal structure here that can be a strength but also a weakness. How can we make decisions differently, particularly in this space?
Well, first, I'd just like to respond to the scope of the challenge. So, we started in late 2021, early 2022, working with Trillium Manufacturing to just quantify the opportunity for Canada in the battery space. And between the time when we first started looking at what's a status quo scenario look like and what's a really ambitious scenario look like, we actually moved the really ambitious scenario down to status quo because there was so many investments, so much happening on the ground. So this is a space that's moving extremely quickly. I'm sure we'll get to talking about movement south of the border. So that challenge is not to be underestimated. But I think what other jurisdictions have done really effectively in the manufacturing space is really lean in with a clear plan. And you can look at a jurisdiction like Quebec that has kind of gone and thought through with a public-private partnership. Propulsion Quebec, I know, is here today, thinking about what are our objectives, what the metrics we're going to use to measure them by, what are a few key goals and objectives. And you can see this in other successful jurisdictions like the United States, like Europe. And they've really not only kind of set the yardstick and been clear, where does our jurisdiction want to compete? What do we need to do to get there? And created kind of a public-private dialogue that doesn't stop with governments are known for putting out a strategy, but it doesn't stop there. It's kind of an iterative process. In Europe, there's a battery alliance with 440 stakeholders feeding in, talking about what needs to happen to get to that metric. So I think that kind of industrial policy is going to be really key to Canada's success. But when something like the Inflation Reduction Act happens, you need a capacity to be able to be reactive.
Oh, that's great. It reminds me of the great Mike Tyson line that everyone has a strategy until they get punched in the mouth. And the IRA, in some ways, was a punch in the mouth for public policymakers. So we'll come back to that, how we need to adjust there. But I just want to get Lana into the conversation, because none of this happens without people. So what, even though the robots that we're seeing are amazing, those were actually made by people. So what do we need to be thinking about in terms of a people strategy to accelerate this?
Yeah, so a couple of things, and I'm really glad you mentioned industrial strategy, because I think if we don't plan this transition, if we don't manage the transition, which means making sure that people are taken care of, that we're doing job matching and skill matching and being able to transfer folks into new jobs if their jobs are at risk, which there will be jobs at risk, so we have to make sure that workers are taken care of. So if we're not actually doing that planning, all eyes in the world and in Canada are on us right now to get this right. And this is the first major industry that we've seen this kind of transformation happening. So it's no pressure here on any of us, but getting it right is key, because workers and other sector leaders will be watching what we're doing here, which is why I think it's really important to have an industrial strategy, to plan along the way, to make sure that we're doing everything possible to ensure that workers are coming out of this with good jobs and good paying jobs. Because as you know, in Canada, the big fear around any kind of transition is that workers get left behind, and we have to make sure that doesn't happen.
But I think we all know the jobs won't be the same. We have no idea what jobs will exist 10 years from now, and we're not even sure what skills will be needed for them. So how do we take a more flexible approach, perhaps, to workforce strategies with that in mind?
Well, yes, flexible, but also planning for the kinds of skills that will be needed. Looking at one of our recommendations from our auto strategy paper is actually looking at a skills inventory, and that means the skills that we have, that workers have, and then the skills that will be needed, and making sure we're matching those. So I think in auto parts, for example, we're looking at, in terms of Unifor workplaces, about 1/3 of those workplaces and workers are at risk because they may be in facilities that are currently producing parts that will no longer be needed. So it's about understanding that and then ensuring that those workers have an opportunity in battery plants and in other facilities. And also, to Linda's point, really building along the supply chain. We can't let any investment go untapped here. We are in a unique moment where the world is looking at supply chains in a different way. The auto industry is looking at supply chains in a different way. Trying to localize more of that supply chain base, I think, is critical, and that's how we'll get the jobs of the future in Canada.
Let's, Marissa, I know you were keen to jump in there. I'm not going to read your mind on what you were going to speak to, but I'm hoping we can start to shift to IRA and responses that we need to think about as a country. What do you think is the most important signal to Canada from the IRA that as governments, particularly in budget season, are thinking about how to respond? What are the things that they should be most concerned about, but also see as an opportunity?
Yeah, I think Rachel and Lana have both touched on it, and it's planful, and sense of urgency really cannot be overstated here. We have so much opportunity that you might be at risk for boiling the ocean or feeling like you need to boil the ocean, but I think with an intentional plan and an intentional budget to really go directly at where Canada is well positioned to win, leveraging some of the great aspects of having that manufacturing, the processing, the entire ecosystem, and allow it to complement the IRA, because we're not going to be able to beat the IRA in terms of amount of money, but we need to match in some aspects so that we can encourage the investment to happen in Canada where it makes sense, and we also need to optimize the benefits of doing work in Canada, one of which is access to green energy. It was one of the most compelling reasons to put our cathode active material processing plant in Quebec. It was the access to green energy at low cost, great from a logistics standpoint. We had good government support with very good return on investment for the government support, and the talent. The talent is plentiful in Canada, but we need to continue to accelerate the pipeline of the talent. So I think, sense of urgency is absolutely critical, and intentional, meaningful approach to, responding to the IRA to ensure that we're incentivizing companies to invest in the manufacturing and take advantage of this generational opportunity.
I wonder, Linda, if I can pull you into this point and push you both a bit further on this, because your companies, among many others, are probably thinking through mandates and capital allocation, and IRA has really been a game changer. I was at Davos a few weeks ago and was really taken aback by how rattled the Europeans were, genuinely, almost existentially, by IRA. And they're now responding. We'll see how Canada responds. But I don't think there's a deep sense of, among many constituents, of just how significant the shift has been. We're seeing this with many of our clients in other sectors who see the cash flow and the investment opportunities in the current year now in the U.S., and they're shifting decisions very rapidly. Linda, maybe talk a bit about how you're kind of viewing the landscape and at Linamar thinking about the landscape in a post-IRA environment.
Yeah, so I'm going to start by saying a couple things about why I think that Canada and Ontario specifically, but Canada more broadly, is perfectly positioned to be the manufacturing powerhouse of the next century. And part of it is what was just brought up around energy, right? We have one of the cleanest energy grids in the world. Ontario is 94% clean energy. This is where we should be making everything, and certainly anything that is a high energy consumer to make, like batteries, right? Making a battery is a huge consumer of energy. A study out of Sweden showed that making the battery in an environment where you're like 65% fossil fuel energy, which is what the US is, which is what China is, generates 17 tons of CO2 to make one battery pack. A typical internal combustion engine generates 6 to 8 tons of CO2 a year. So, you've got 3 years of internal combustion engine driving on your electric vehicle before it's even pulled into your driveway. That doesn't happen if you make the battery in Canada. So we really need to prioritize putting anything that is a high energy consuming manufacturing process here. So I think that's a massive advantage that we have. And the second huge advantage is the history we have here of deep manufacturing capabilities intersected with a deep technology sector, the intersection of which is almost unparalleled in the world, that we have the kind of strength that we have in manufacturing, coupled with the strength that we have in technology, artificial intelligence, machine learning, all of these areas that when you intersect the two, you get advanced manufacturing. We have that here in Ontario in a way that almost no other jurisdiction in the world has. So, we have the energy grid and we have the capability to really take manufacturing into the future. So, to me, that means this is a place we should be doing more and more. I think that certainly there's attraction to invest in the U.S. thanks to IRA. However, there's also a huge shortage of labor. I mean, there's a shortage of labor globally. There's a shortage of labor here in Canada. But in the U.S., it's massively worse. Honestly, massively worse. I mean, we have facilities in the U.S., and we are struggling to put people in place in a way that's unparalleled in other countries. So to me, that's a real downside to trying to establish more facilities in the U.S. when they don't even have the people to work in the facilities that they have. So I mean, you have to think long term. What's the right long term place to locate your facilities? I mean, to me, right here is the place to do that. And I think the role our government can play is in a couple of ways. Number one, by telling that story. I don't think we do a good enough job of telling that story globally to attract more investment here for the reasons that I describe. And secondly, putting some money behind it, as already suggested, that can help attract business here as well, because other jurisdictions are doing that. So and people look to that. I know it's short term; it's just today, but people look to that short term money when they're looking to put an investment in place. So we need some support for that. We need support for the investment, support for the R&D to make it happen, and we have all the other pieces here. So I think we've got a really good story to tell if we tell the story right.
Marissa?
I just wanted to add that Canada's in a very different place than European companies or based companies, given the construct of the IRA. So vehicles built in Canada are applicable for the consumer-facing credits, as well as batteries. So there really is a North American friendly construct to the IRA. Now what we have to be cautious of is the investment for the manufacturing facilities. There's a huge portion of that taken in, as part of that legislation that, we're suggesting Canada needs to participate in to ensure that we get the facilities here to employ the Canadians. But certainly the product that is built in Canada and the applicability of the consumer-facing incentives in the U.S. is a huge advantage for Canada versus some of the other countries that you're seeing, really concerned at this point.
So I just, if I can stick with you too for a follow-up, because I want to be clear I understand. You both seem to be suggesting we've got foundational strengths here, and those are real differentiators. So continue to play to your strengths, invest in them, but we don't need to do radically different things to match the IRA. Is that
I
correctly
think
what
that
I'm
we
hearing?
do need to put some money behind, attracting investment here for sure. To the workforce point, I mentioned it's much worse in the U.S., but there are workforce shortages here as well. So trying to focus on immigration, and that is an articulated goal of our government, which is great to see their focus on trying to increase the level of immigration. I think they need to broaden their perspective around that. Their immigration policies tend to be a little too focused, and we need a broad spectrum of capabilities. Skilled people, unskilled people. Not everybody has to have a post-secondary education. We can give them the skills that we need them to have on the shop floor. I mean, we can't find people to fill those positions as well. So, we need a broad range of people from an immigration perspective. So I think those are a couple of areas that they need to focus.
Lana, maybe we can turn to you for that. How, because it is an incredible advantage we have, and that gap with the U.S. is probably going to grow. So it's not just getting immigrants, they're coming in prime working age years, so a real economic advantage there. But as Linda was saying, having kind of the job readiness is sometimes a challenge. How should we be approaching immigration, particularly a bit differently to add to that advantage?
Well, I think immigration is one part of the solution here. There's no doubt about it. Canada, we've been facing this demographic cliff for a very long time, so it's not like we didn't know it was coming, a little slow to react to it in some ways in terms of a public policy perspective. And let's be clear, the pandemic did set us back a little bit on on everything in many ways. But I think what's also really important is we have a skilled workforce. We have people already working in this industry. The first priority should be, how do we keep them working in this industry? How do we retain them? How do we make sure when we're going through the massive retooling that's going to occur that we're doing everything we can to shorten those retooling periods, and government and employers and unions being able to come together to make sure that those retention pieces are happening. So currently we have an employment insurance system that's not going to do the trick. We've got to think about what our social supports are going to be like in this transition period and make sure that they're as strong as possible. I also think governments are going to have to improve, their incentives based on what the IRA is doing right now. But keeping in mind, we do also have other advantages in Canada. We have critical minerals that is the envy of the world, which is really important in this whole transformation that's taking place. But on that front, we also have to get better about how we develop those critical minerals, which is having consent with First Nations and working on this as quickly as possible so that we can get these critical minerals developed and get this big project we're talking about going right now.
Some of the ideas on critical minerals are going to take a long time, and a longer time than you're probably thinking about for some of these investments. How do you, both Lena and Rachel, how do you kind of square that circle? Let's stick with you for
Okay.
and then Rachel.
Well, I think that the reality is that mining development does take a long time, but there is starts happening everywhere right now, and there's incredible incentive to do this. We've just got to make sure we do it correctly. And in many ways, if you look at, for example, Unifor's position here, in 2020 collective bargaining, we knew at that moment that this was going to be happening, that we were headed for a massive transformation. And for us, it became, are we going to be part of this transformation, or are we going to be left out of it? And what you've seen in really 3 short years is a massive change in terms of the investment that's coming to Canada, $20 billion, I think, since 2020, and more of it to come. So a lot of planning already. How do we speed up these critical minerals? I think it's, if you have a will, there's a way, but that way involves making sure we have consent with First Nations in Canada.
But I fear a lot of that 20 billion is announced and not money that's leading to proverbial shovels in the ground. How do we speed up that time from announcement to execution?
Do you have more money you want to invest, Marissa?
Yeah, I think reducing the regulatory burden to get them going. Let's start there. Like, you're going to need a will because you're going to be dead before it gets done. Like, we need to reduce the red tape that is going into getting these mines started. I mean, there's a ridiculous amount of work that needs to go into it, years and years. Like, I mean, let's simplify it. This is critical. Let's get it done. You know, that's what frustrates me around the whole thing.
But Linda, we've been talking about that challenge for a long time. How can we go about it in a socially responsible way at a much faster pace?
In my opinion, it's not mutually exclusive to be socially responsible, sustainable, and fast. Like, we can do that. Look at COVID. Look at the stuff that got done during COVID when it's a crisis and you have to pull together to get things done, things get done. So, I mean, why don't we look at it that way instead of saying, okay, yeah, it's all right that it's going to take 12 years to get this mine approved. Like, that's not okay.
Rachel, you've been on both sides of the fence on some of these decisions.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think it's a big challenge. I have worked on resource management and Indigenous consultation on resource projects as part of my past. So I would echo, I think, what Lana has said, and I think there's really, it's becoming, I think, even more understood as a business imperative to be working in partnership with local communities, and that's just, like, that's a good and proactive way of doing business, and many people are seeing that. And I also 100% agree, and I think, you know, a number of jurisdictions are looking at, and we have to too, how do you trim, you know, these kinds of assessment processes? How do you eliminate duplication between provincial and federal processes? How do you streamline, fast track in any way you can? But it is a delicate balance, and it will be one, I think, that's hard to get right. I would maybe just steer away from your question slightly too, and say, as you know, Canada, I think we often recognize the critical minerals advantage. But I think as we're thinking about how to get those minerals out of the ground, another key thing for Canada to be thinking about is really making sure some of that value add happens in Canada, and how do you build the supply chain in such a way where you really are getting some of that value here, and some of those sort of at least beginning of midstream parts of the manufacturing process here. And I think there's great work underway. I mean, I think even the GM and Vail kind of agreement around, you know, nickel processing in Canada is a great way of showing we're getting Canadian minerals, we're going to, you know, process them here. There's a lot of really exciting things, I think, happening there, but I think there's a challenge both in the, you know, fast tracking and also in being strategic about how do you try to keep some of that GDP, jobs, value here in Canada.
Marissa, if I can come back to you as somewhat of a newcomer to Canada, and we're talking about differences in some ways between the U.S. and Canada, so you have a unique view. How do you see our collective decision-making process here in terms of its strengths and room for improvement, as some people might call it?
So I'll say one of the strengths that I've observed is the access to government. They make themselves available. They want to have the conversations. The roundtables are there. But to put it frankly, it's excruciatingly slow. And then it's complex because you have the federal and then you have the provincial. And depending on which province you're dealing with, you know, we see it's different every time. And it kind of feels from a newcomer, isn't there a framework for which we can operate, for which we can have these discussions, or does it really have to be starting from square one every single time? So my hope, and I put it politely when I said we need to respond with a sense of urgency, we need to move fast or this opportunity will slip away. And by moving fast, it means we need the help to make sure that we're, you know, acting responsibly, we're in lockstep with the indigenous communities, that we can take advantage of extracting the minerals in a responsible way and processing them in Canada. That is our intent with our joint venture with Altium Cam there in Bécancour and the announcement that we have with Vale. This is a pivotal, very distinct difference from mining minerals and shipping them around the world. This is mining minerals, piping them directly into a precursor plant, which is adjacent to the cathode active material plant, where these things are flowing between buildings and pipes. They're not being shipped around, and that's good for the GHG footprint. That's good for workers. That's good for creating this whole end-to-end ecosystem. And then they, by the way, end up in a battery packing plant that ends up into a vehicle. And now they're all compliant with the IRA for the customer-facing incentives in North America. And so that's the opportunity. But the amount of work that went into being able to put a shovel in the ground in Bécancour in an already zoned industrial park was painful and time-consuming. And we cannot go through that every single time, because the opportunity will pass us by and it will take too long.
Can you just elaborate a bit more on this critical point? Because I heard you say excruciatingly slow. So those are key words for maybe all of us to take away. And there is an unbelievable urgency here. Give us a sense from a global GM point of view how urgent this is, so we all have a way of framing it.
Well, like I said, we have the minerals secured that we need for the capacity to build 1 million electric vehicles in North America by 2025. Now we're very focused on the latter part of the decade, and we know that adoption curve is getting steeper. And so in the key, by the way, we haven't talked about affordability of electric vehicles, but that's absolutely critical to the consumer, and it's critical from an automotive perspective, so that we can continue to be a profitable company, so that we can continue to employ all of the workers across Canada, across the globe, that we're able to do. We need to have affordable vehicles that are profitable to sustain this entire ecosystem. And so as we look to the future, scalability is foundational to achieving that affordability, to achieving the profitability. And so we're keen to move very quickly. We know that these are not supply agreements like of the past, where this supplier will stamp out a control arm for us and this supplier will provide us a seat. These are partnerships, because we have there's capability in processing these minerals that only resides in Asia today, and we have to bring that to North America. So there's so much to get done, that I don't want to put this all on the government. We need their support to move quicker, because we are all fundamentally aligned in our goals. We will have zero emission vehicle light duty fleet by 2035. That's the commitment. That's also the goal of the government. So now is the time to work together, because 2035 isn't that far away.
We're going to open it to the floor in 5 minutes for broader questions, but I wonder if I can kind of move towards audience questions with a few questions on innovation. And you've laid out great opportunities and challenges here, but I'm thinking of the entrepreneurs, the technologists, the innovators in the room who are probably thinking of great opportunities for disruption here. How do we ensure that disruption, creative destruction even, is taking place here in Canada, and that we're not going to be kind of receivers of some rapid advancements done elsewhere? Linda, you've got a great global perch on this.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and I think what's fantastic is we do have such a great ecosystem here in Canada of innovators, of people coming up with all kinds of interesting new technologies that we can use in this transition in the industry. So I think the key is that we keep connected, we find ways to encourage those businesses and help them to get going and to grow. So organizations like NGen can be a part of that to help them, commercialize products. There's other organizations, OG100 comes to mind, that is there to help scale companies that are looking to scale at a greater level. So I think there's all kinds of places where we can try and gather all the people who have these technologies together so that we can collaborate and work together. I mean, that's a big part of what NGen is all about, is to encourage collaboration between companies, small companies, medium-sized, large companies, to find solutions faster together, right? And I think there's huge value in that. And I think we have a lot of natural points, other incubators, Communitech, Mars, a bunch of places that universities that are trying to, and colleges that are trying to bring all these folks together. So I think we definitely need to encourage that. Because I think, something Jay said in his opening remarks was really important. We need to skate to where the puck's going, not where it is, right? So, obviously right now it's all about battery electric vehicles, and there's, huge amount of investment and work that's going on there. But to me, the 2030s are going to be for hydrogen, what the 2020s are for battery electric vehicles. So battery electric is still going to absolutely be a huge part of the landscape in the 2030s, but in my opinion, hydrogen vehicles are going to start to gain some traction at that point. So we need to be thinking about that as well, and the technologies that we need and the minerals that we need, and how do we make that transition. I mean, happily, fuel cell electric vehicles and battery electric vehicles are obviously both electric vehicles. So it is an easier transition in the sense that the propulsion system is the same, the e-axle is the same. You've got a gearbox, you've got an electric motor, you've got an inverter, and then the energy either comes from the battery pack in the battery electric vehicle, or it comes from the fuel cell in the fuel cell electric vehicle. So the transition will be easier than going from internal combustion, to go straight to fuel cell. So to me, battery electric is a super important technology. It's going to be a really important part of the mobility ecosystem, but I think that fuel cell is going to be a very important part as well for several different slices of the mobility sector, starting with commercial vehicle, where it doesn't make sense to fill up your payload with batteries, but I think quickly transitioning also into the pass car area. So we need to be thinking about that from an infrastructure perspective as well, that we need the battery charging infrastructure, but we also need the hydrogen infrastructure to fuel up those vehicles that are coming pretty soon. Just last week, I think, was it Honda that announced that was it Honda or Toyota that announced that they're launching a hydrogen vehicle in 2024. They've dramatically reduced the cost of the hydrogen system, and they're already jumping into the market. So we need to keep an eye on that, and I think that's another area that we can tap into this ecosystem for.
Please jump in, Marissa.
One thing I just wanted to make sure I point out, the unsung hero of this transformation is software. And it's a huge part of the reason that GM has a Canadian Technical Center, right here in the Greater Toronto area. We have over 1,300 engineers that are primarily working on, software, whether it's active safety, semi-autonomous, battery controls. And so at the same time that the propulsion of our vehicles is completely transforming, so are our vehicles becoming platform integrators. And so all of that comes together in this, incredible rate of change that we have in the industry, and it's part of a very important role that Canada can play, and the talent within the engineering community that each of these great universities is graduating is critically important. And then not to mention AI and the opportunity that lies ahead of us. I don't think the automotive industry has started to even tap into some of the opportunity that the AI absolutely will present, in the decade to come. So, and I agree with Linda that absolutely we're, the zero emission vehicle future, there's a place for fuel cell hydrogen electric vehicles, and we need to plan for that sooner rather than later.
So if time permits, we'll come back to the semiconductor and chips challenge and how you're thinking through that. But Len, I want to ask you about the skills needed for the so-called computer on wheels, and how you're helping your members kind of think about what they'll be doing both from a hardware and software perspective 5 years. Maybe it's not even 5 years. Maybe it's 5 weeks out.
Less. Well, in CAMI, we're already there building vehicles right now. So first of all, I think we're going to have to really consider what skills are needed, and then how do we deliver them. So there is an opportunity during some of the retooling periods, for example, that if new skills are required in the new facilities, that we can use that period to get people skilled up. Some of the skills we may not know right now what will be required, so it's about staying on top of those things as well. And but you know, we have a long history of workers in the auto industry adapting and gaining new skills. This is nothing new to them. And I don't expect that we have one member out there who's not expecting that they're going to have to get new skills in this new world. The reality is, though, is that we have to make sure that everybody is part of that employers are there, which I know they will be, because they won't have a choice. They'll need to have trained folks, and that the government is coming in with the support that will be required to make that happen, and that great training institutions are also part of it. It's coming back to what I said at the beginning. This is how we have to manage this transition. A big part of managing it is making sure that workers are ready for the good jobs that should be there for them.
I think we'll
make sure they're good jobs, by the way. That's what unions do.
Open it to the floor for questions, but while people maybe put their hands up and we get mics to them, Rachel, it always seems to come back to you. And you know, genuinely, I mean, this is a fascinating Horton cart challenge. So, how, if you're the horse here, or how do we ensure that the electricity systems are advancing at a speed that will keep up with the changes that we're seeing at the manufacturing level and perhaps the consumer level if it hits that hockey stick? Otherwise, as you well know, we're going to hit a real frustration and perhaps crisis for the user, which could undermine everything.
Yeah, and I was really excited to hear industry leaders talking about the competitive advantage that Canada truly has for our clean electricity grid. But I think we're often talking to policymakers around, there's going to be increasing demand. How do you make sure our grids are getting cleaner and not dirtier to keep that competitive advantage? There's increased transmission requirements as we switch to even more renewable energy. There's a lot of stuff that governments can be doing on that side. And I think, I was saying to you in advance, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but like having a comprehensive strategy and engaging in long-term planning around the electricity grid allows grid operators to better understand what kinds of power is going to be coming from electric vehicles once you have these massive fleets out there. What role does bidirectional charging going to have? What's the demand for if we want to have another cell manufacturing facility? Who's going to want dedicated clean power coming to it? How are we making sure there's some security of supply there? And there is, a disaggregation in Canada where there's a lot, obviously, of responsibility at the provincial level. So really making sure there is kind of this thoughtful dialogue, I think, between policymakers at the provincial levels, regulators, other folks, really thinking about what does that plan look like? What are we going to need? And how do these different pieces pull together to really make sure that Canada keeps its competitive advantage and sufficient supply to really power some of this manufacturing powerhouse that I think we want Ontario and Canada to be?
Well said, and perhaps everyone in this room can help with that disaggregation conversation, because I sense that some provinces, not to name names, see this more as a regulatory burden than an economic opportunity. Questions from the floor? Yes.
Hi, I'm Luis Lea from
There's a mic runner there for you. Thank you.
Yeah. Luis Lea from Phoenix Contact. So we have a lot of questions about around cybersecurity from network operators. So what do we see, especially that Rachel mentioned about bidirectionality, right? So what are the standards that are being developed around that? We're trying to understand that, so I don't know if you can shed some light on it. So.
I don't know.
But no, Marissa, I'm sure your folks worry a lot about this.
Yeah, certainly. No, interesting point about the bidirectional charging, and we have an organization, GM Energy, actually, that's wholly focused on how do this is a new part of the industry for us. Certainly, cybersecurity of our vehicles is not new. We have a large organization and an extensive amount of focus to ensure that our vehicles and our customers are safe from cybersecurity standpoint. But our GM Energy organization is really figuring out and working with the electric companies is how are we going to put all of these vehicles onto the grid and then ensure that things like cybersecurity are not compromised. So work to do. I'll be honest, I'm not an expert in the area, but it's certainly something that as an industry we have to remain vigilant on.
And cyber, I mean, we see this in banking. It is, team sport doesn't sound quite appropriate, but we're all in it together. If one of us gets hacked, we all get hacked. And there's reputational concerns, but the interconnectivity is critical. So that's maybe some guidance or insight for the sector that you're all literally going to be wired more than ever, and with the electricity grid. There was a question here.
So first question is, do you think the government's at different levels policy ambitions between the critical mineral space and the electric vehicle supply space are fused and aligned? It's tough when you're keeping track of all the different announcements. That's one question. And the second is, are the ambitions with respect to medium and heavy duty vehicles equal to what we're starting to see in the light duty vehicle? Is it that we sort of start often with passenger light duty and then those other models are to come? Medium heavy duty commercial is more the space I think about, so I'd be curious your thoughts on that.
Oh, I could jump in on the medium heavy side. So as I was mentioning a minute ago, there's a lot of momentum building on the fuel cell side for medium and heavy, because to go battery electric for commercial vehicles really doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Because you're putting you're filling up your payload with batteries. So fuel cell has there's a lot of momentum building about fuel cell electric vehicle. Also, combusting hydrogen is another area that there's a lot of discussion around in the medium heavy side. So to me, we're going to go hydrogen electric for medium heavy, while the pass car side, starts out on the electric side, in my opinion.
Maybe I could respond to that one first. And I guess I would say, I think the MHDV space is exciting and another frontier where we've seen this curve kind of start taking off in the LDV space. Obviously on MHDV pickup in Canada, we're really not there on the purchasing side. But really excitingly, there's some, like manufacturers in the Canadian space where, if we've historically had about 10% of the market share in the LDV space, the fact that we've got some exciting players, the Lion Electrics, the New Flyers, the Nova buses on the MHDV side, I think there's people eyeing that and saying, can we support that manufacturing sector to get even more than our kind of historic balance there, share? There are obviously even different challenges to trying to make sure that the grid is ready, the charging infrastructure is there, fleet operators are going to make different decisions than individual purchasers. So I think there's certainly a whole other ecosystem of challenges around making sure Canada's ready for MHDV, but again, lots of excitement. And on your first question around, I think, connecting the dots, I think that's one of the things about the strategy, I think, is making sure Canada decides where they want to lean in, where they're going to make a play, where they want to be putting these big investments to try to match the US, and where they might not be. So, I think one of these things is making sure that investments that have come from the SIF and others, really have that unifying theme and are thoughtfully invested.
All right, another question here. We'll have a few more minutes of
Hi
Q&A.
there. Thank you so much, presenters, for your knowledge on these topics. It's very insightful. I represent EcoHive. We install DC fast chargers in the Greater Toronto area. With the recent announcement of
Can you come to my condo building?
I can try, but that's boards, and I don't know how long that's gonna take. But anyways, my question is with regards to the federal tax credit that was announced in November. A lot of our customers are, eager to find out how that is going to work. From what our understanding, there's a 30% tax credit that customers that install electric vehicle infrastructure are able to retain. But there's no clarification, so we're finding it a bit difficult to move projects now that it's actually stalled some of our projects that we're going to move forward now that the tax credit has been announced. Is it that we're waiting for the end of the fiscal year to find out how this is going to work? Is it going to work similar to the ITC credit in the US? Just any information that you are able to share today, that would be really appreciated.
Who wants to speak for the Department of Finance up here?
Rachel.
My short answer is I don't know. No, it's a great question, and I think a lot of us you can tell, are really expecting some more announcements to come out of this budget, and whether that will be clarifying, augmenting, what's been previously announced, or whether it will be new investments. I think I certainly don't know. I'm not in those rooms, but definitely appreciate it. There's definitely a sense, I think, of anticipation and interest in seeing what will happen in Budget 2023.
If I can add a thought to that, if any of you are dealing with finance or others, really stressing the importance of this this calendar year or this fiscal year, depending on your sector, and the point that money is flowing in the U.S. out of IRA in different areas, and investment is moving quickly with that. And it's a Canadian habit, and also with respect to Department of Finance habit, to announce something and then spend a year studying the execution details. One of the game changers of IRA is that money's going out the door in this fiscal year, and we'll figure it out and we'll fix it as we go. So I think we need to help finance kind of think that through, but also maybe encourage them to take a bit more of that risk on the execution details.
Well, they did it through the pandemic. They figured
Well, exactly. Yes, exactly. There is
it's not
experience.
impossible to do.
It's not impossible. I know we're over time, so Jay, we can give you back a few minutes to wrap up. But thank you to the panelists.